Have you ever felt like your mistakes define you? Well, it's time to let that go. We have to realize that everybody makes mistakes and that's a part of growth. But what happens is when we make mistakes, and if you're dealing with BPD or in a relationship, somebody with NPD, or even if you have NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, those mistakes feel like they are the definitive you, that is the actual you. And what happens is that you don't forgive yourself. You don't recognize what you can learn from those mistakes. You only self-attack with those mistakes, is that you charge yourself with whatever the mistake or the error was as proof that you are the mistake, that you are the problem and issue. Well, we're going to talk about how BPD and NPD, how they look at these mistakes differently. And I'm going to try to build some insight, help you understand the attached shame. And then we're going to go through the self-forgiveness that you can utilize to outgrow this stuff, because you are not your mistakes. Oh man, I understand that mistakes can hit you hard, and they really can. And they can make you feel like, man, all I do is make mistakes. All I do is fail. All I do, and I understand that, but we got to shake that off. Now, mistakes are processed differently based on whether or not you have borderline personality disorder, the full disorder or traits, or narcissistic personality disorder, the full disorder or traits. And these could be comorbid, which means that they coexist. So you may get a little bit of one, a little more of the other. Now recognize that human beings are complex and personality is complex. So you could have aspects of both of these. So just keep that in mind. They're not mutually exclusive, that a lot of times you'll get a sense of overlap and a combination of these different factors that we're going to talk about. Now, individuals with BPD, they internalize their mistakes. And they internalize it with a sense of shame, self-punishment, and pushing people away, even though at their core, they have this fear of abandonment. They have rejection sensitivity, and that means that they're really sensitive is if people are going to reject them, not listen to them, not want them. They're going to devalue them. And that creates another component, which is called emptiness. Now, those are the three classic factors for individuals with BPD. Now, we could look at Sarah, for example. Now, Sarah forgets her friend's birthday, and she just spirals into guilt. Does that ever happen to you? Like, you make a mistake, you forget something, because life is pretty fast these days, and you forget something, and you get this guilt spiral. And you're just spiraling. And she believes that she's a terrible person. So she took the guilt instance where she's spiraling, blew it up to then equal that she's a terrible person. And because of this, she withdraws instead of apologizing. So now she is self-isolating, but she feels abandoned by her friends, even though her friends didn't really abandon her or reject her, but she felt this shame, so she felt like she had to punish herself, and then she pushes others away, which causes her to feel abandoned, rejected, and empty. Now, in narcissistic personality disorder, these individuals tend to externalize the mistakes, so meaning that they blame shifting, they blame other people. That's not me, it's you. You did that. They often engage in blame shifting, meaning that it's not me, it's you. You did that. They also tend to get really wrapped into defensiveness and denial. And for the central concept, the core content for those with NPD is fear, shame, doubt, guilt, and inferiority. And they externalize all of that because if any mistake that they made, and everybody makes mistakes, but if they were to recognize that and embrace it, then what that means is that they really are shameful, they really are inadequate, they really deserve to be guilty because it's everything in the whole wide world is their fault and they're broken inside, and that's why. So you see, that's why they externalize it. That's why this development of narcissistic personality disorder is really a defensive mechanism, because internally, psychologically, they can't handle the mistake. They can't handle no matter what it is. Like, let's take a look at Mark. So Mark misses a work deadline, but he blames his boss for not giving clearer instructions instead of owning up and improving it. Now, let me tell you what happens to Mark. So Mark goes in, he blames his boss. His boss is like, what are you talking about, Mark? And then that puts Mark on a pretty negative trajectory, meaning that the boss is now thinking, well, we may need to get rid of Mark because he's not taking ownership. He's not learning from his mistakes, and that's something else. If you all you do is externalize it or you over internalize it, and we see that, right? BPD, internalize it, NPD, externalize it. At the extremes of those, it just destroys any insight, ability to learn and grow from the mistake. So what happens is you deflect it like Mark did, or you internalize it like Sarah did, but you don't grow from it. You have to see the mistake for what it is. It's a mistake. Either you forgot a birthday or you missed a work deadline. You own it and say, you know what? I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen again. And you talk to your boss about it. That way, you show, in Mark's instance, that you're willing to work through it. Now, NPD prevents him from doing that, just like I said a moment ago. Because remember, fear, shame, doubt, guilt, and inferiority make up that core content. So they're not going to go in there and say, yeah, you know what, I made that mistake. I shouldn't have done it. And instead, you're going to say, well, it's your fault. You weren't clear. If you were clear, you would have had it on time. And the boss kind of like, what? What's up with that? Right? Not a good work environment. So we got to break the cycle of shame. And that's what really is one of the main components of what prevents individuals from seeing the mistake for what it is and managing it and being able to forgive yourself to move forward. And that's the key at how we do this. We got to see the shame for what it is. And shame, often people engage in a shame spiral. You've probably heard that before. And it's self-punishment and avoidance keeps you stuck. Is that you get sucked in and almost like a python of shame wraps around you. And then you're punishing yourself. You're putting yourself on a punishment plan. Then you engage in avoidance of others or avoidance of taking responsibility for whatever the mistake is. So then you're stuck. You're ultimately stuck. And you lose the idea, or it's really hard to embrace the idea that mistakes don't define you. And I understand it can be really hard to grasp those things. Everybody makes mistakes and we're embarrassed and we get a little bit of shame. But everybody makes mistakes. And if you don't recognize them for what they are, you can't grow from them. And you can't forgive yourself about it either. For example, if we talk about Jake, so we'll talk about this guy, Jake. So Jake, right, lost his temper in an argument, but instead of dwelling on the regret, he reflected, kind of like, what happened there? He apologized for his behavior, and he worked on getting more and better emotional control. Very different. Jake is a very different situation, and Jake's utilizing a very different perspective than Mark and Sarah. And because he's growing from it, not only do others tend to be more open to wanting to include Jake in various experiences, because they're not like, oh man, she's really sensitive in the Sarah component. And then a lot of times, like in Sarah's scenario, is that it was really hard for her to manage her emotions, self-isolation, so she's self-withdrawing. So it just added a level of pressure and intensity to those relationships that she had. And then for Mark, people were like, well, he doesn't take responsibility for anything, so I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be bringing Mark into this. I don't think so. But Jake, people are like, yeah, you know what? Jake's all right. And that's what we want. So you made a mistake. That's all right. But you got to forgive yourself for it. Recognize everybody makes mistakes. Well, there's 6 steps to doing it. Step number 1. You got to acknowledge it. You got to accept the mistake without judgment. Don't judge yourself for the mistake. A mistake is a mistake. Don't judge yourself for it, but you have to accept what it is. Accept the error. And also recognize that errors happen. They happen in your romantic relationships, your familial relationships, your work relationships, every type of relationship you have. There's a mistake or error in there that has occurred. Maybe it keeps occurring for whatever it is. That's all right. We have to accept that these things occur. If you can't identify it and see it, how can you deal with it, change it, and grow from it? Because once you acknowledge it, then you have to separate. Meaning that don't attach your personality with the mistake. You are not your worst moment. Remember that. You are not your worst moment. I know it feels that way. I've made some real humdingers in my life of mistakes. You like that, humdinger mistakes? Those are big mistakes. I've made those mistakes, and I bet so have you. But we learn from them. And sometimes it really hurts when you got to go up and you got to take the responsibility for it and say, I'm really sorry this happened. I'm really sorry I did this, that, da, da, da. But you got to take that ownership. But that's not about who I am. I don't define myself by that, and I don't want you to do that either. So first, acknowledge. Then you're going to separate. Then you got to learn. And you're going to reframe mistakes as growth opportunities. Edison did it. We got light bulbs. So he learned something from all those mistakes, and he didn't just make one prototype and be like, hey, it's working. Nope. Now, I've read different books. They say almost 1,000 different prototypes, hundreds and hundreds, whatever it is. But you never give up and reframe those mistakes as growth opportunities. I think we see that individuals in their 20s and younger, what happens is they hit these barriers, and these barriers they believe are telling them, well, this barrier or the mistake that has happened, that means I shouldn't be doing it, so I'm not going to do it. And what that does, it saps out all your drive and your ability to grow from the opportunity. So we're not going to do that. We're going to learn from it. Then we're going to make amends if that's what you got to do. Man, I know that stinks. Taking responsibility without condemning yourself. Don't attack yourself. Don't make yourself feel horrible about it. You got to own up to it. If you have to make amends, then you do it. You own up to it. Now, you don't deserve to be chastised for doing the right thing and taking ownership of the mistake. See, that's the thing, is that sometimes people will take advantage of that and be like, oh, well, they made a mistake, and I'm going to use that, turn that on, and I'm just going to let them have it. No, I mean, I'll take some shots, If I made a mistake, then and the person's like, really, I mean, you really need to be paying more attention to what you're doing. You really need to whatever it is. All right, mea culpa. But I'm not going to be there for 30 minutes while you chew me out for the mistake that I just acknowledged and that I just recognized as an experience I'm going to learn from, and I just took responsibility for it. I don't need a 30-minute lecture. So, and there's ways to get out of that, right? And if you have ways of getting out of that, appropriate ways of getting out of it, leave that in the comments. That helps people because they want to learn how you did it. Making amends, and yeah, you're going to hear it. You're going to hear it a little bit. I don't think you deserve a half hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, of just a litany of mistakes that you've made and things you've done and so on and so forth. Yeah, no. No, I think we all have to have some self-respect in that as well, but adaptively manage those situations and being assertive, not aggressive, screaming at that person, or passive, sitting there and taking it for 30 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it is. So we got to find that healthy balance. Now, number 5 is practice self-compassion. People are terrible at this. People are terrible. They're great at condemning themselves, which I wish they weren't, but they really are not good at self-compassion, and I want you to be good at self-compassion. This means you've got to speak to yourself in a kind and understanding way. You'll be like, you know what? Man, I really messed that up. So where I used to work, if we were in a meeting or whatever, and my boss, so she was really cool, and if there was an error, and then as she's describing the error, if I'm like, oh man, that's my mistake. Now, she was really cool. She was like, I'm not calling anybody out, but I would usually say, oh, that was me. I'm really sorry about that. And she was cool. So she would be like, yeah, I know it was you. I wasn't going to call you out. And then she would tease me a little bit and say, you're always throwing yourself in front of the bus. I said, well, if I made a mistake, I'll own it, and she never lectured me or anything. Usually either in the meeting or afterwards, whatever, I say, oh, I'm really sorry about that. This is what I'm going to do to do it differently next time. But part of that self-compassion is like, oh, darn it. Well, all right. How can I learn to do it more effectively next time? I didn't make it about who I was. I made a mistake. Usually it's paperwork mistake where I used to work. So, It happens. What can you do? And then lastly, you got to move forward. And this is, you got to set realistic goals for improvement, just like the example that I just gave you. Is you make a mistake, you own it, and how can I learn from it? And how can I do it differently next time? What are those realistic goals so you don't engage in that perpetuation of mistakes over and over and over again, doing it differently? Let's go through the 6. Acknowledge, separate, learn, make amends if you have to, practice self-compassion, and moving forward. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Remember that. It's freeing yourself from the past and not having that mistake attached to you like a ball and chain forever, because you're never going to go anywhere, because every mistake you make, and we all make thousands and thousands of them all the time, you're going to have so many balls and chains back there, you're not going to go anywhere. And that's not what this is about. Unlock yourself, right? And move forward. You can absolutely do this. You are more than your mistakes. Your future is defined by what you learn and how you engage in various scenarios. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody. You, me, and everybody else. And what we learn from it and how we take it forward, that's the important thing. And recognize those personality patterns absolutely factor into it. But those 6 steps are helpful for both. Those with BPD and those for NPD. So I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.